From the 22 News Plus studio, this is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of In Focus. I am your host, Patrick Berry. Politics is always a hot topic, whether you're here in the Bay State or in New England or across the country or across the globe. Here in the United States, for the last, maybe 100 years or so, it's been a two-party system, Republicans and Democrats. I am so very fortunate today to be joined in the 22 News Plus studio by Amy Carnevale. She is the chair of the Massachusetts Republican Committee. Amy, thank you so very much for joining me. I greatly appreciate your time.
It's great to be with you. Really glad to be here joining you today.
So I have to ask you, and this is probably the question you get most often. We're in what everybody globally looks at as a blue state. Mm-hmm. It's primarily a democratically, if that's the right word, you know what I mean, democratic state. So how do Republicans get anything done?
Yeah, so I would say probably, a state that's been controlled by Democrats at the legislative level. But it's really important to remember at the gubernatorial level, Republicans have actually won 6 of the last gubernatorial elections. So, that tells me that voters in this state really are independent minded and they're really open to voting for a Republican, particularly on fiscal issues. And it's also really important to voters here in Massachusetts to have some balance. So that's probably the number one issue that me as chair of the Republican Party here in Massachusetts talks about is having that two-party balance.
And I love that two-party balance because then it really prompts negotiation, prompts discussion. When you have a one-party system, I feel that the other party, no matter which party is in control, just feels like they're getting shafted, So I always like the fact that, whether it's a national politics or state politics, or even in your local town, if you've got a, Republican representative or Democrat, that the two parties I think it's a better system that way.
Yeah, you're right about that. It really, the dialogue between parties leads to better public policy and more transparency and more accountability. I even hear from moderate Democrats that kind of behind the scenes and privately, they'll tell me, you're doing a great job, keep it up, because that moderates us as a Democratic Party as having a more successful Republican Party, so that the more left side of the Democratic Party really cannot kind of control that agenda on Beacon Hill. And unfortunately, what we've seen today is we are in a situation where we have Democratic supermajorities on Beacon Hill, both the House and the Senate, and all statewide offices and all federal offices here in Massachusetts are controlled by Democrats. So that's a message that we're really pushing is we need to come back to that two-party system.
So looking at the party system here in Massachusetts and through your travels, I'm unenrolled. I chose to be unenrolled many years ago because I want choices. I like the ideas of people on both sides, and I want to be able to vote for whomever I want. Is that sort of a common theme here in the Bay State, or are people really party specific?
It is a common theme. And in fact, over 60% of voters now are unenrolled.
60%?
Over 60%.
Really?
I think it's over 62% actually are unenrolled here in Massachusetts. And we're seeing party registration in both parties decline as a result. And I think that speaks to the fact that, again, here in Massachusetts, people want choices and people do like to consider voting for candidates based on their positions and what they're advocating, and more so than the party label itself.
So when it comes election season, in the fall, whether it's, in 2025 or 2026 next year, we've got midterm elections, which are national. How do you and your fellow party members, whether either side of the coin, how do you get people to go to and vote for your candidate?
Well, first of all, the first step is really quality candidate recruitment.
Okay.
And that actually brings me here in Western Mass today. We're actually holding a candidate recruitment and training seminar in Ludlow. So we kind of put the word out to our Republican town committees and also through some text messaging as well, trying to use new media, reaching out to voters to say, have you thought about running for office, or do you know someone who's thinking about running for office? Come and meet the Republican Party. And so we have the myself and the staff at the party will be having a seminar talking to people interested in running and talking about the tools that are available. And it's changing all the time. Running for office is very different now than what it was even 4 or 6 years ago with technology. Thinking about texting capabilities, thinking about targeting voters. And again, you identified yourself as an independent voter, and those are the types of voters that we want to be talking to as Republicans and our candidates want to be talking with. And so we have ways now through technology of identifying those voters and being able to kind of micro target those voters and have conversations on issues that may interest them.
So the question I wasn't planning on asking. So you're here in Western Mass for an event to sort of educate potential candidates on your party. So is it just your party, or will somebody from the Democratic Party be represented? Or it's just
no. So this is today is just about our party, and it's actually we were out here. We were in Springfield and in the spring talking to candidates thinking about running for municipal office, and now we're talking to people thinking about running next fall for legislative offices.
So you're already talking about next fall.
Yes, we're talking about next fall.
I guess that makes sense. Yeah. Yes. So you have to get all your signatures. You have to become a qualified candidate. Blah,
exactly. And so, and it's really an advantage to think about in our system here in Massachusetts for a lot of reasons. It's really an advantage to think about announcing before the end of this calendar year, going into next year, to reach out to voters. And our campaign, a lot of reasons, our campaign finance system is based on the calendar year. So we're talking to potential candidates now, and people who are active in the party and getting them thinking about reaching out to potential candidates because we want to offer choices to voters. So it starts with a quality candidate, and then as we think about reaching out to voters, talking about what we present as a party, and again. It's based a lot on those candidates. So the first step is really getting quality candidates who come from the communities. Maybe they've coached a sports team, active in the schools, and whatever background they bring, they'll bring those experiences in the communities. And so those are the candidates that we're looking to try to recruit to the Republican Party. And then the next step is talking about the message.
Fantastic. We're up on our first commercial break. We're here in the 22 News Plus studio with Amy Carnevale. She is the chair of the Massachusetts Republican Committee. We'll be right back after this.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry. This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Welcome back to today's In Focus. Across the desk from me here in the 22 News Plus studios is Amy Carnevale. She is the chair of the Massachusetts Republican Committee. Amy, thank you so very much for joining me again. I want to shift gears a little bit. We talked, in the first segment of just generalities. But I want to really get into a little bit more about the Republican Party as a whole. Maybe not specifics, but as a whole, like some of the values, some of the things that the party holds dear. I guess I would launch it with that. Is what are some of the values of the Republican Party that you want people to understand?
Yeah, so the Republican Party here in Massachusetts, we talk a lot about fiscal accountability and also having decision making kind of closest to the family unit. So that means, giving parents control over their educational decisions for kids. That's an important factor. We actually highlighted through the party's podcast a few weeks ago a situation in one city where middle school students were given an explicit survey, sexually explicit survey. And we highlighted that the parents were not given the option in this case to opt out, which actually is federal law that they should be given that. And the podcast actually drew the attention of the Department of Education, which actually then got involved and reminded this school district that that's a decision that should remain within parents to opt their kids out of a survey like that. And in fact, the survey had some questions that were even inappropriate for middle school students.
Probably inappropriate for adults.
Exactly. So, so those are the types of issues that we get involved with. But again, you'll see, especially thinking kind of at the statewide level, we really talk about that fiscal accountability, and that's an issue that resonates with a lot of voters here in the Commonwealth. And it's an issue where, again, getting back to that issue of balance, that we really see that we need that balance. I'm sure you've talked about it on your show before. The auditor, and there was
I haven't gotten into that one yet.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a great subject to come. There was a ballot question that passed with an overwhelming amount
Was
of
that last
voters.
year, 2 years ago?
It was last year.
Okay.
And the auditor has been fighting ever since to enforce that audit against the legislature, and the legislature just has not cooperated. And again, that's something that where if you have more party balance, that you'll see greater accountability. And it's just crazy that over a year has gone by now, and
Right.
still no audit. Yeah.
It's interesting. A statistic I saw recently was that Massachusetts in the current political year, 24, 25, or most recently ended political year, I want to say it was like 4,800 bills were filed and about 40 passed.
Yeah.
So
I think it was the least productive legislature
in the entire nation. From that,
and it's we also are one of the few that is considered a full-time legislature too. Well, I'll just actually highlight another issue that I was an original signatory on, is a ballot campaign that we're trying to get on the ballot for the next election on the issue of stipends for legislative leaders.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And it's something that has, I would argue, and it's actually, I've partnered with a lot of progressive groups on the left on this issue, that legislative leaders on Beacon Hill are giving out these leadership stipends in the form of salary to committee chairs. And in some cases, they're committees that have never even met over the last 2 years. And the leader of this committee is, they're given up to, $26,000 for leading this committee in the form of a salary that doesn't even meet.
Wow.
And it's really a system that has, it's a way for the Speaker of the House and the leaders to control their committee chairman, rather than, have a more diffuse system that's more accountable and open.
So you started that comment by saying you're trying to get a ballot measure move forward. I had an interview not that long ago with a political science professor, and he said Massachusetts is one of those states that has so many ballot measures because of that, that infrequency with which bills get passed. Is that because there can't be cross-aisle negotiation and agreement, that the public kind of rises up and says, all right, well, if you're not going to get things done, we're going to create this ballot measure?
I think it's less about cross-aisle agreement than it is about the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader allowing bills to come forward for a hearing.
Really?
Yeah. Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
See, I really should probably take Civics 101 again, because I have to go back and, I remember what was it, the old cartoon when a bill becomes a law, right? But I should probably watch that again. That's Civics 101.
Although we would argue that here in Massachusetts, it's they don't always follow the way that the system should work. And this is a case where citizens have risen up, and in the case of this stipend ballot question, it's actually a former Democratic legislator who is involved with that committee as well. So it's an interesting group kind of supporting this effort.
So taking all of that and bringing it back to Republican values, sort of a conservative spending approach, is that sort of kind of the root of the Republicans? Yeah,
absolutely. And again, having a more transparent system is one that we've been talking a lot about. And we've seen on Beacon Hill, and the audit is just one example of we've gotten away from transparency and accountability to voters. And spending within our means, I should say. If you look at the budget in Massachusetts, it continues to increase year after year. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we could go down and talk about the migrant crisis and over $1 billion a year.
This show's only half hour.
Yeah, maybe I could come back another day and we could talk about that. We would argue that we need to look within our own means for spending reductions because Massachusetts has now become the second least affordable state in the nation after Hawaii. And so it's really hard to raise a family here in Massachusetts and stay here. So we need to look at budget reductions.
It's interesting you bring up the affordability here in Massachusetts. It's atrocious. And I look at my kids who are late 20s. And by the time I was in my late 20s, 30 years old, I had my first house.
Mm-hmm.
My kids aren't going to have their first house by the time they're 30. Yeah. One daughter lives, north of Boston, and one daughter lives out of state, but it's still, it's the same. So do you think certain things like East-West Rail, kind of change things so it enables people to like live here in Western Mass, Munson, Ludlow, Palmer, and be able to commute to Boston for the higher earning jobs so that they're more affordable living out here?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, yes, East-West Rail, options for easier commuting, telecommuting. I think those all need to be options, given the high cost of living in the greater Boston area.
We are up on our second commercial break. We're here with Amy Carnevale, the chair of the Massachusetts Republican Committee. We'll be right back after this.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry. This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to today's edition of InFocus. I am your host, Patrick Berry. We're here in the 22 News Plus studios. Across the desk from me is the chair of the Massachusetts Republican State Committee, Amy Carnevale. Amy, thank you so very much again for joining me today. We've talked a lot about, the Republican Party sort of abstractly, nationally, and so forth. And I'm going to use a phrase, or refer to something you may or may not like. Tip O'Neill, all government is local. Does the Republican Party believe that all government is local? And that's really sort of where the boots hit the ground and things get done?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I'm actually glad you raised that. And,
nice.
We absolutely agree that all politics is local. And ultimately, when you see voters engaged, very often they're engaged at the local level, thinking about how their school is funded. We see some of our most competitive and I would say energetic campaigns tend to be school committee campaigns.
Absolutely.
Because parents are so vested in the education of their students. And so when something is going, very wrong or very right, they want to get involved and they can be very vocal. Overrides are another issue that we see, a lot of communities. In fact, we're seeing a lot of overrides right now being discussed at the local level. And that's something that actually the Mass GOP is providing some guidance and to our local town committees as they engage and think about overrides and talk about overrides. So the local politics are really what energize voters, and we want to be, as a Republican Party, we want to be running quality candidates at the local level, for a lot of reasons, because frankly, those are the decisions that really impact the lives of residents in Massachusetts the most in many cases. And secondarily, when we think about elected Republicans at the local level, that's our bench for then thinking about running for state representatives, state senate, and our city's mayor. So if we don't have people identifying as Republicans at that local level, then, we have less of a bench to think about.
It's amazing to me when I look at voter turnout each election year, and you bring up a very good point. And we both did, local politics is local. So when you see the presidential election turnout, and I just shake my head and I go, why didn't you vote last year when we were voting for our city councilman, our mayor, our town manager, whatever it might be? It frustrates me to no end because that's really where your life as a resident of any community really changes.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And as we both said, the impact on actually residents is more greatly felt at the local level and people they elect at the local level, and that tends to be the lowest turnout. So, we try to remind people about that. And ironically, we see a similar thing with people wanting to volunteer to help Republican candidates. They tend to come around every 4 years for the presidential election. And,
Right.
even though Massachusetts is, we'd like to see it more competitive, but it tends to be a tough state at the presidential level. And we see all kinds of volunteers coming out and say, I want to help the presidential candidate here in Massachusetts. And we'll say, great, but would you consider holding a sign for your local
Exactly.
state representative or your select board while you're at it? And so we try to translate that that spirit of volunteerism to the local level.
So continuing with the local level conversation, Massachusetts, as you take the 10,000-foot view, is very different. Here in Western Massachusetts, we have a significant amount of primarily Republican communities, in the hill towns and so forth. I don't think you have that in the eastern end of the state, do you?
No, we don't. And in fact, it's interesting. We've done an analysis kind of following the last presidential election of communities. And as we think about recruiting candidates and where we want to do recruiting, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it was many of those suburban towns around Boston.
Right.
And now it's very different. We're thinking about Western Massachusetts, Central Massachusetts, some of the surrounding Worcester communities, and down in Bristol County in particular. Those are, some of our more blue collar communities tend to be those communities that either voted for Donald Trump or voted in high numbers for Donald Trump. So those are the communities now that we're looking at to recruit Republicans.
So I will tell you, and you probably hear it throughout your travels in Western Massachusetts, is tell those folks in the eastern end of the state that the state extends beyond 495.
Very much so. Very much so. Yes.
So do you, because of there are a lot more Republican communities out here, do you spend a lot of time, because I know you're based in the eastern end of the state, do you spend a lot of time out here personally, or maybe not boots on the ground out here, but actively analyzing how to grow the party out here and recruit more people out here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am spending time out here, and also, virtual calls, spending a lot of time on the phone and virtually communicating with our Republican town committees, recruiting candidates and just talking about issues. So I do find myself spending more time because, again, this is really one of the Western Massachusetts is where we want to look to
It's a beautiful section of the world.
And it's beautiful, particularly this time of year. So yes.
I know Boston Common has wonderful foliage, but nothing like the Berkshires and Carnevale.
It can't compete out here. Yeah.
So, Amy, we only got about a minute left. It's sort of the tail end of 2025. 2026, what do you see you and the other members of the committee really targeting for next year?
Yeah. So, just to talk at the high level, we have 3 great candidates now running for governor. So that's really going to energize.
Who?
So we have Mike Keneally was first to enter the race. Brian Shortsleeve was second, and Mike Minogue just got in this week. So all strong candidates.
And they're all from the eastern end of the state?
Yeah. So Brian Shortsleeve is from Cape Cod, and the other 2 are from the eastern end. Yeah. Yes. But, having a competitive primary for the first time in a long time for governor, that's going to energize people.
Oh, yeah.
So I think we'll see a lot of energy and a lot of interest in the Republican Party. And I think that's going to translate down ticket as we see more candidates running in Western Massachusetts, in Central Massachusetts, and even down in Bristol County.
It's funny. People will come to me and say, hey, will you sign my paperwork so I can run for office? I will always sign because I want, and I don't do that for me. I do that for all of us because I want all of us to have a choice.
Yep.
Let that person, if they feel passionate enough to run for office, give them the pulpit where they can go up and tell us about their views, their positions. But I will always sign somebody's paperwork.
Yeah, having competitive elections and giving voters a choice is always a great thing.
That is a great way to end. Amy, I cannot thank you enough for your time today. I will certainly have you back, and then we'll talk a little bit more specifics about the Republican Party and the world we live in.
Yeah,
Amy, thank you
great.
so very much.
Thank you.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.